All righty, good morning, everyone. This is Cynthia LaRue with DIOPATH. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're logged into our webinar called Cloud Services, Grounded in Reliability. Jordan, if you'll move forward. And I'd like to kick off with introducing our panelists. We have James Melchor. He is our Chief Technology Officer. Welcome, James. We also have Bill Borbas on the line. He is our cloud expert, so we're so glad to have them both here today. Thank you, guys. Jordan? We have an awesome agenda today planned for you. We are going to go over just a brief overview of DIOPATH. We have some webinar objectives. We want to make sure you know what we're going to go over with you today. And we're going to talk about how cloud is a matter of survival, the urgent business need. We're going to talk about optimizing the value of cloud for your organization. We're also going to talk about some success in the cloud and how you can actually get started in the cloud today. We're going to have a Q&A session. As you come in, you're actually on mute, but we absolutely welcome you to ask to be unmuted. Please feel free to raise your hand. You can send me a question through chat directly to the host, Cynthia LaRue. You can type through the Q&A. You can raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand feature on the WebEx. So whatever you'd like. You don't have to ask your question out loud. You can just chat it to me. Whatever works for you. But this is highly interactive. We absolutely welcome questions. You are not interrupting anybody. So please feel free to just chat me or use the Q&A tool or the hand raise tool. Okay, Jordan. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to James. Good morning, James.
Good morning. How are y'all doing today? So I just want to start off with a little bit about DIOPATH and just a little bit of background before we get into the agenda items. So we were founded in 1996. We work in the commercial, government, education, and energy space. So 65% of our business is commercial, 35% is federal. And we also support clients in those vertical markets in 10 different industries, 65 cities through the U.S. And also we maintain over 150 total certifications, technical certifications, as well as business certifications. And then also, since we, majority or a large portion of our business is federal, being 35%, we also maintain a top secret security clearance with the U.S. government as well. And that allows us to work on those type of contracts. Jordan, next slide, please. And just to cover a couple of the objectives for the webinar, so we're gonna touch on a couple of things from applications and maybe around on-premise applications that you have and the inefficiencies and unreliability. Also, just how those applications actually work, are they resilient, and those type of things, and what to look for. And then also how the cloud can help those. We're going to give a couple scenarios as well and use cases around that. And then also from there, we're going to touch on a couple of new things, transformational type things within the cloud as well, and a couple use cases there and things that are really coming about or will be coming about in the future as well. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Bill to cover cloud as a matter of survival, the urgent business need.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And I do want to reiterate what Cynthia said. If there is any time while I'm speaking or James is speaking, please do interrupt us. We want to keep this interactive, and we'd love to answer your questions as you have them. So on this first slide, or I'm sorry, what I'll be covering in this presentation, I'll be talking about cloud's unique advantages, the dangers of foregoing the cloud, and considerations for business continuity and disaster recovery planning. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start with a quote, and it's from a book I just finished, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. And in it, he says, never accept or be too comfortable with the status quo, because companies that get into trouble are historically the ones that aren't able to adapt and respond quickly enough. And for many companies, moving workloads to the cloud or a full cloud migration can be a major change from the current model. And let's face it, change can be uncomfortable. It requires us to pivot from how we've done things in the past. But the reality is, whether we like it or not, how people and partners consume our products continues to evolve. And this requires flexibility on how we work, elasticity with the tools we use, changes on how we address security, and reliability. And so a forward-thinking cloud strategy is imperative to meeting client demands. And being a step ahead of our competition has many advantages, which I'm going to walk through next. So if we can go to the next slide. So the obvious advantages of a cloud strategy are reducing overhead and scaling with ease and supporting a remote workforce. So we'll talk about business continuity and disaster recovery. And if a natural disaster wipes out an entire data center, recovering can be a major endeavor, even if all of your data is backed up offsite. By comparison, cloud computing makes disaster recovery much easier. Virtual machines can be automatically imaged and backed up to geographically redundant cloud storage, and this can be done on a schedule. And even if an entire cloud zone or region goes offline, it takes just a few clicks to move infrastructure to another place. I want to point out, cloud is not an all or nothing thing. So for instance, one example, Azure DR services allow companies to keep some services on-prem and also some in the cloud. And then you can go to the cloud when an event occurs and then move your workloads there then, protecting you against a major disaster. There are efficiency gains. We encourage IT departments not to handle the mundane tasks of dealing with physical servers or operating system updates or database administration. And this frees up your valuable IT department for strategic initiatives and enabling technologies that drive the business forward. Cloud also provides choice. It allows you to deploy your applications in the most efficient method. So you could choose to run applications on a virtual machine in the cloud, or utilize platform as a service or software as a service options. Security in the cloud, it is far simpler. Security is largely controlled by identity and access management roles and not by managing physical access. This is easier, it's faster, it's more testable, and it's simpler to automate. And let's face it, when things are simpler, there's less that can go wrong. Let's talk about management. Managing and updating server software is easy and automated with cloud computing. And with most cloud offerings, the underlying operating system is upgraded automatically with limited or zero downtime or user interaction. And then last but not least, cloud is extremely scalable. Cloud-hosted applications can scale from zero load to planetary scale in minutes, and that without human involvement. This lets companies save a lot of money because you can scale down during off-peak times and scale up on demand instead of running powerful servers near idle during parts of the day. So before we go to the next slide, I'm going to just do a quick pause just to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Bill. Right now, there aren't any questions, so thank you for asking that.
All right, very good. If we can go to the next slide. There are two types of companies. There's ones that proactively improve with new ideas, and then those that try to adapt after they're forced to by the competition. And companies that use cloud to its fullest capacity gain a big competitive advantage over those who do not. And even if your company is happy with its current infrastructure, your competitors are already taking advantage of the cloud's benefits. The most significant risk associated with avoiding a cloud migration is falling behind the competition in terms of efficiency, agility, and support for remote and distributed teams. Cloud is a matter of survival, and staying relevant in today's world requires adapting to huge changes, which includes cloud computing. So we're going to look at that picture of Blockbuster video. And at its peak, Blockbuster had over 9,000 stores, employed over 80,000 people, and was worth about $5 billion. And then less than a decade later, it filed for bankruptcy. Now, cloud was not the only thing that factored into Blockbuster's demise. However, not adapting to how customers wanted to consume their services had a profound impact. We're actually going to talk about Netflix later in our case study section and the efficiencies it enjoys. by delivering its services through the cloud. So let's look at that. Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I just want to say I miss Blockbuster just a little bit. But the question is, why is cloud better than an on-premise data center? Why is cloud better than an on-premise data center? Thank you, Bill.
That's an excellent question. We're going to actually, so some of the things that we'll actually talk about in the future in the presentation will cover that, but I'll jump into it just from some of the key. It is nearly impossible for an individual business to create a data center with the redundancy and capabilities of a cloud data center. So there are going to be multiple carriers that come into a data center. When I say multiple carriers, it could be AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, you name it. So, and they're going to come in from different points of entry. The cloud data center is going to have security that is just overwhelming, everything from man traps to biometric readers and things like that before you can even get access to it. And when I talk about it, it's going to either be everything from a cage that houses a physical server to virtual machines to software as a service or platform as a service or other cloud functions. There's going to be redundant power. There's going to be just unbelievable security, and even the buildings are built to withstand major weather events and things like that. And that's just one data center. Most of these mega corporations like Azure or Microsoft or Amazon, they have multiple buildings. So even if one of these things got knocked off the planet, your data is now housed somewhere else. James, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the other things I would add to that is really around compliance. So these companies like Microsoft, AWS, even some of the private cloud providers, they've built these facilities with cybersecurity in mind and regulatory compliance in mind. So when you start looking at checking a box to say this facility is certified, a SOC 2 or SOC 1, SOC 2, or a FedRAMP certified, those type of regulatory compliance requirements, it's almost a box perspective versus you would have to build that out in your own data center. And those are significant investments that would have to be made just to get it to that level. So I think that's another major reason why to look towards the cloud versus building that out internally.
Excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So I'm going to move on. You're going to see the burning $100 bill, and companies that don't move to the cloud are likely to have higher wasteful IT spending. They're burning money. You end up paying for expensive compute resources based on what you think you might need versus what you actually might need. And aside from requiring overkill servers, on-premise hosting takes a lot of unnecessary labor. Keeping software updated and secure and running at full performance generally involves a lot of effort that can be avoided with cloud computing. So the next three pictures are all going to be centered around a business continuity planning. And so I'm going to focus on that blue screen in the middle. It was a February, I don't remember what year, but my kids were playing on our home computer, and I heard them calling, saying there was something wrong. And I was greeted by the blue screen of death. I tried rebooting my computer, nothing happened. And after hard powering it off and hard powering it on, all I heard was a click. The hard drive had failed. And I had forgotten, I had an external hard drive, but I had forgotten to run our backups for the past 3 months. This meant that all of our Christmas pictures were gone for that year. And as painful as that was for me, what if this was your valuable company data? We worked with a client and they had performed regular local backups, but they were compromised. They were breached by bad actors. And the bad actors had first wiped out their network attached source or their NAS, and then they just started deploying their ransomware. And an interesting thing about ransomware is that encrypted files take up more space than the original files. And if you don't have enough drive space to accommodate the new larger files, inevitably files are going to be permanently deleted. So this customer, after even paying a 6-figure ransom, you may never actually get your files back. And so with both the case with my hard drive and this company's ransomware attack, cloud strategies like online backup and others were deployed to mitigate future risk. Now,
we have another question. All right, what is SOC 1 or SOC 2? What is SOC 1 or SOC 2? Thank you, Bill.
I'm actually going to hand that over to James, just because I know he's a little bit stronger in that area.
Yeah, so those are service organization certifications. So when an entity or like a managed services provider is in operations, they maintain service organization certification level 1 and level 2 or type 2. And what those really say is how is my infrastructure put together, right? Do I have all of my company policies and procedures? Do I have these documented? Are they followed? Can I follow the audit trail, right? So these are to really prove the maturity of an organization through its policies and procedures, make sure that they have disaster recovery plans for themselves, making sure that they have like privacy policies, any type of data security policies, those type of things. So there's a progression from SOC 1 type 1 and SOC 2 type 2 and so on. So really it's really around the organization itself and its maturity.
Very good. I'm going to key in on the picture on the upper right-hand corner, and that picture is an actual picture from the Chicago Groundhog Day blizzard of 2011. I remember that day. I remember opening my garage door and seeing a wall of 3 feet of snow. I realized very quickly I wasn't going anywhere for the next few days. And so while most people probably got a snow day, unfortunately I did not. Other than being stuck at my home, I was able to conduct business as usual. My IP phone continued to work, and I still had access to all the needed applications and resources from the day before. I was actually tempted to go outside and disconnect my internet connection. No, I'm just kidding. At DIOPATH, we can work from anywhere, and nearly all of our resources are in the cloud. So whether that be email, files, CRM, phones, and collaboration, they're delivered by software as a service, platform as a service, or other cloud infrastructure. And these solutions, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, they're inherently secure, even right down to my laptop. If my laptop were lost or stolen, outside of the cost of my actual machine, all my files are stored in the cloud and not locally. So everybody there, they get a nice machine, but they wouldn't get much more. Whether it's the threat of a blizzard or a hurricane or a pandemic, cloud provides resiliency and the ability to support a remote workforce. It enables your people to be safe and productive in a multitude of situations. So if we can go to the next slide. Companies that don't use the cloud have a high potential for downtime. According to a Spiceworks survey, nearly a quarter of companies have not tested their disaster recovery plans, despite 90% of them having them in place. Protecting against a loss due to a disaster does require a well-tested, rehearsed plan. Another thing that was really interesting to me, 32% of companies don't even or only 32% of companies cover HVAC in their disaster recovery plans, and only 43% consider physical security at all. Because cloud computing leaves physical concerns like power and cooling and physical data center security to well-prepared mega corporations. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, how Amazon and Microsoft do these things. Companies utilizing the cloud don't have to make these considerations in their disaster recovery plans. Cloud computing allows your company to avoid dealing with entire classes of hairy problems. It saves you money, and it will improve your protection against a loss from business or loss of business continuity. So I'm going to go to the next slide.
We have another question.
Mm-hmm.
What if I have data that must remain on-prem for regulatory compliance? What if I have data that must remain on-prem for regulatory compliance? Thank you, Bill.
I'm actually going to hand that over to James as well.
Yeah, not a problem. So there's, you know, as the cloud has evolved in, you know, over the last, I would say 10 years or so, there are cloud facilities that are now within the states and things like that. And I'll use the state of Texas as an example. You know, data cannot go outside of the state of Texas for some of the state of Texas data. So there are facilities that are now based in certain regions for those areas. So it's usually not the fact that it can't go outside of your area. It's more so, or outside of your on-premise infrastructure. It's more so that it can't reside maybe outside of the U.S., outside of the particular state that you're in, and things like that. So those are some of the, you know, the things to consider, right? That when we talk about cloud strategy is understanding the needs of your data, and I'll actually touch on that in my slide in a bit, but and go a little bit more detail.
Very good. Okay, going back to the previous slide, Bill, this question came in. This is, how do you do the testing of a DR plan? What does that look like from a level of effort from my company's perspective? How do you do the testing of DR plan? What does that look like from a level of effort from my company's perspective?
Certainly, and I'll have James add to this, but you know, first and foremost, you know, your disaster recovery plan has to be formalized and documented, and then continuously updated to, you know, because your business is going to evolve. But generally, we'll see either physical tests being done, so it could just be an off-hours nulling in interface or things like that, or it could be actually mapping out a scenario and then having a tabletop discussion or tabletop workshop where you actually go through all the steps of your disaster recovery plan. Disaster recovery plan is going to not only include the technical side of it, but it will also include who does what and who can make decisions and who can write checks in the event that it's something that would require a financial expenditure to address. But it really addresses all those different aspects of what could go wrong, and then actually going through that scenario, whether it be actually from a technology standpoint, but also just what people should do in that situation. James, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just one quick thing. So, you know, to add on to what Bill's saying, you know, the first phase of it really is understanding the business impact. So when you're looking at disaster recovery, it's really a component of business continuity. So first off, you need to understand the impact of what it's going to have on the business, what the objectives are. So, you know, what your recovery time objectives need to be, point in time objectives from a data perspective, you know, and start to categorize the applications or really the applications or the business functions. You know, is it a critical app? Is it, you know, critical app unless rated as a 1? And then is it a level 2, 3, 4? So when you start to look at it from that perspective, then you're creating a priority list. So from there, and then you start to build out the plan. Do I need a test dev environment for the critical apps or non-critical apps? And then what are the difficulties? And that kind of gets into your hybrid cloud or pure cloud design. So when you start looking at, do these apps need to be more of in a hybrid cloud or true cloud environment where it's cloud to cloud disaster recovery? Or is it hybrid cloud disaster recovery, right? So, and all that's driven by the business need. We're really just, you know, our take is really marry the technology to what the business requirements are, and that's really going to drive, you know, what we need to do to ensure the business continuity that the business will, you know, the business can accept, really. So.
Thank you. So if we can go to the next slide. So before we jump into James's part of the presentation, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Is IT your primary source of business? Is your valuable IT department focused on strategic initiatives that drive the business forward? one of our clients, and I thought this was really interesting, they actually, so as it relates to the second question, they rebranded from information technology to business technology. And they have moved all of their compute resources to the cloud so that they could focus on initiatives like automation and application development, rolling out enabling applications to the business and to their consumers, and then leaving the operational stuff to the cloud. So I thought that was really an interesting use case. And then the last question I've asked for you is your infrastructure designed for growth, resiliency, fluctuating workloads, security, and market disruption? So if the answer to any of these questions is no, cloud needs to be a major part of your overall strategy. The reality is that cloud can be a catalyst for driving revenue into your business. Your clients are going to want to understand your security policy and your ability to deliver should there be a major event. And if you're already ahead of your competition in this aspect, this is something that you can market and will be a huge differentiator. So now I'm going to hand it over to James. He's going to be talking about optimizing the value of cloud for your organization.
Thank you, Bill.
James, I feel like this question that's come in probably speaks to what you're about to present to. It's sort of the advantages of a hybrid cloud solution. So feel free to answer that, or if this slide speaks to that, but it's what are the advantages of a hybrid cloud solution?
I will actually answer that probably in the first two major bullets here. So, but then I'll come back to that and just make sure that I covered what needs to really be covered from a hybrid cloud perspective. So, when we start looking at clouds for organizations, there's a couple of things that I like to say, and one is anytime you look at a shift or kind of a transformational shift from a technology perspective or really any perspective, you have to have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, then it's really kind of an issue, because when you look at cloud, cloud is not just a server. It's not just something that you throw your data on, right? There's a lot of planning. So some of the pitfalls that are out there are not having a cloud strategy, and that's understanding, why you're going to the cloud, what are the advantages of the cloud, what type of cloud environments are out there for you. So, public, private, platform as a service, software as a service, those type of environments. And then also from that perspective, the cloud strategy is understanding what is the business goal you're really trying to meet, and then you marry that to your cloud technology. So in one of the examples Bill threw out around business continuity and disaster recovery, well, traditionally in the past, people would build, a data center, or they would build a kind of a infrastructure in one of their remote locations, and they would try to mimic the hardware, and they would invest a lot of money. And they're like, well, my data is replicated. I'm good to go, right? But they're left to manage those environments. Well, if you're trying to shift and be more focused on what your business does and less on being an IT company, then that's where the cloud strategy comes into play. You're really looking at it from the standpoint of I need business continuity and disaster recovery services for these applications, because I know I will lose revenue if these applications fail or these individuals can no longer work. So really that goes into your cloud strategy. Also understanding, what can I do with the cloud? Because it's not about just hosting virtual machines and things like that, but it's also being very efficient with your business. How can it help you streamline things? How can it also help you drive more revenue, go to market faster, right? Those are things that go into an overall cloud strategy. The other piece of that too, one of the pitfalls we see is data strategy and security strategy. So now that you're moving something outside of, let's call it your fence, right, from a house perspective, what type of data is it? So to Bill's point again, and one of the attendees' question, what if I can't move my data outside to a cloud, right? Well, that's also understanding the data that you have. any of the regulatory compliance needs around that data. At what speed does that data need to be accessed? Is it G&G data and things like that? And then also, how secure does the transmission of data need to be? How secure does that cloud environment need to be? What am I giving up by putting my data, putting those environments in a cloud, right? So it's not just a cloud strategy. When you look at it, it's cloud, it's data, and it's a security strategy all wrapped into one. And those are some of the major pitfalls that I see, is where people assume that I moved my email to Office 365 and now it's secure and I'm never going to have any issues. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's countless horror stories of people's credentials getting stolen and people siphoning off emails, and then they moved it there and they were like, well, I thought we were secure. Well, no, there's also a point where you have to secure those environments as well. So really a three-prong approach from a strategy perspective. One of the other things is understanding the cloud cost model. So I always say, every cloud is not for everybody. So you really have to understand, what's best for you. Some cloud environments offer more of a pay-as-you-go model where it's based on consumption. Some models are pay-as-you-go, and you buy a month at a time. Other models are buy upfront resources and things like that. So there's different ways to consume the cloud, but there's also a lot of different models. And if you don't have a cloud strategy and you don't understand the way your data operates or how quick your data is growing, a lot of people early on got in trouble with moving workloads to the cloud and then getting an invoice that was 10 times higher or 5 times higher than what they were anticipating to get. So those three things, from a cloud strategy, data, and security, and then also understanding the cost models associated with those are critical. If not, instead of having cloud be something efficient for your business and really helping you drive revenue, it will be the opposite. It'll be a major cost center for you. So that's another pitfall that we see. And then also, cloud gives you the ability to move very quick, right? You can pivot your organization very quick. So transformative innovation has an impact on stability. So if you don't have a strategy at all, and you start moving your workloads there, you can move it very quick. But what you also can do, and we've seen it, is clients start to impact the stability of the applications or the environments, and end users start to complain and they're starting to see downtime. And usually that's because they're moving too quick without a plan. So then everything is really ad hoc. Oh, we got to change this. Now that gives a really bad perception to cloud as well, when in reality, there was a lack of planning that caused the instability. So that's a major one to look at, because once an organization realizes what they can do with the cloud, I don't want to say you have to slow things down, but you have to have a thorough plan to really execute on moving things to the cloud, and be very careful how quickly you move things. So I think I saw a question pop up, Cynthia.
We did, thank you. I was trying to find a little break there. I think this slide is seeing a lot of interest about the value of the cloud. I think that was a great comment that you made about making sure you know what you're investing in. The question: once I move to a public cloud, how do I ensure that systems, applications, and database performance remain functioning at a high level? How do I know that I'm not being charged for capacity that I'm not using? So once I move to a public cloud, how do I ensure that systems, applications, and database performance and security remain functioning at a high level? And how do I know that I'm not being charged for capacity that I'm not using? Thank you, James.
Yeah, not a problem. So good transition right into the next one, and I'll answer this. So the main thing is creating that cloud strategy. And the piece of it is you have to test. You have to understand if my data is on premise and I have it on this type of infrastructure and I move it to, let's use Azure as an example, I need to make sure that the performance of the machines that I'm moving it to are at the same level, or if not more. So if you're trying to move your data from a SQL database and you have solid state hard drives on premise, and then you try to move it to the spinning disk on spinning disk hard drives in Azure, you're going to have a performance hit, and it's going to be most likely pretty significant. And the reason for that is, one, you're moving your data further away from your end users, but at the same time, you're also putting it on slower spinning hard drives. So it's like somebody having a Ferrari, and then they get a very economical vehicle and expect to go the same speed. It's not going to happen, right? So those are some of the things that go into a cloud strategy, is really understanding where am I moving my data, or what does my data look like today from a performance perspective? Where is it going to go? And then let's test. And then you can do the validation there. And we've seen that occur as well as probably as a problem. From a hybrid cloud perspective, hybrid cloud comes into play there as well. So a lot of clients like to have the ability to have those larger environments, and I'm going to say G&G data or any type of like AutoCAD type data where it resides local, but there's a cloud component to offload the storage, back up the storage, snapshot the data, keep it for long periods of time, and offload it to what we call cold storage or archive type storage as well. So those are some of the advantage of if there is a need for on-premise data, and linking your on-premise infrastructure to the cloud, that is a hybrid cloud approach. So. All right, so transformational, I think we went, okay, transformational trends in the cloud. So the next two ones are really are more forward thinking, and for, just to give an example of where cloud is going. So transformational trends in the cloud. So multi-cloud, omni-cloud. So in the past, multi-cloud was the big thing. So that means I'm going to 365, I'm going to Salesforce, I'm going to Azure and AWS and Oracle Cloud and Google Cloud and all these things, and because I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket and things like that, right? So, over the next 2 years, what you're probably going to see is a shift back to Omni Cloud. So what that means is there's a lot of investment, a lot of operations, a lot of DevOps, development operation type things that that go into play to link these multi-clouds together, right? So the shift back now is really starting to go to Omni-Cloud. Is it's not about data portability. It's like, how much development effort, how much effort does it take to manage and maintain all these multi-cloud environments? And now a lot of people are saying, well, I'm going to pick one horse, and that horse is Azure or AWS or Oracle. And I'm just going to put all my resources focused on building efficiencies upon that one cloud or private cloud, right? So that's going to be a shift in the future. And honestly, as AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, start to really get trickled down to companies that can afford it now, that is going to be a big shift where it's more development on one cloud versus trying to have it on multiple clouds, right? The next one is really everything as a service, and you hear the term is cybersecurity as a service, infrastructure as a service, a platform as a service. Well, you hear hardware as a service. So what you're going to start to see is your traditional companies, and Cisco even stated it not that long ago. They're moving more to a subscription model. So expect your traditional hardware, software, any type of vendor to move more towards a model that is delivered as a subscription service with a term of 1, 2, 3, 5 years, right? Or even monthly. And really, it's a shift in a revenue model for them. They're not looking at the one-time hit. They're trying to really move towards a model that is a monthly recurring, very similar to your phone bill or your cell phone bill and things like that. So just expect that from vendors that are out there that are not really cloud, but now are converting to cloud, right? They might be offering your traditional software in a SaaS model, and where in the past you bought it for 3 years, you're going to be now paying for it month to month. So those, you'll start seeing that really accelerate over the next year. The other one is SaaS operations, and it's kind of funny because this is something we actually wrote about in a proposal to a proposal for a client, I want to say about 4 years ago. And it's finally getting some traction, and really is all the adoption of these SaaS providers, like Salesforce, or Salesforce is one. There's some couple like Workday and maybe a couple of other ones that are out there, right? There's a lot of SaaS type products. A lot of organizations just threw that on the operationals team and said, yeah, manage that on top of the infrastructure. Well, in reality, there has to be an operational governance model for these. So you got to understand these SaaS-based solutions are not just infrastructure, right? There are applications, there's services, there's business ties to them, heavily tied business processes to them, and they have to be governed. So there has to be an operational governance model for these type of SaaS-based applications. If not, they'll get very out of control. They start to integrate with things, and not saying it'll create more shadow IT, but you're really, it's going to be shadow processes. IT will not know what the business units are doing because they're not ones managing those processes. So when they do change something within the infrastructure, you can impact them as well. And then you're going to start creating that instability that we talked about from that transformative innovation items. So the other one is phone system, phone infrastructure in the cloud. And that's not new, but the dependency on it is really what's occurring. So a lot of companies now, they're expanding what you would consider your traditional, UCaaS as a service or phone system in the cloud. They're tightly integrated with the CRMs. They're tightly integrated with ticketing systems. They're tightly integrated with, operational processes, call trees, escalations. I mean, they're integrated with the collaboration. So everything is just converging fast. And you're already seeing it with Cisco Teams. It's very similar to Microsoft Teams now. You're seeing the kind of consolidation of tools, collaboration tools in one, and that's just going to continue, right? The plugins to Salesforce, the plugins to all these other applications, you're just going to see it become part of that kind of ecosystem. So that's another thing to look at and really just be aware of. So the last one is artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is one I really love because there's just so much great use cases for it recently, and it's really getting to the point where the average size business can take advantage of it, right? And early on, it really, smaller companies couldn't. So I just wanted to touch on a couple things before I move to the next slide. So forecasting of inventory. So there's companies that are looking at trends, based on their inventory. So I'll use Walmart. I know they're a massive company, but looking at the inventory that they have, looking at the weather patterns, looking at disasters in certain regions, looking at different things that impact their regions, they can actually start to say, okay, and here's one that came out of Houston, I was talking to Bill about, was the consumption of Pop-Tarts during hurricanes in Houston or Texas is massive, right? And they would have never known that until they started really running that data, that data through these platforms. And when they did, they were like, cool, now I'm going to start shipping additional Pop-Tarts to Houston prior to hurricanes because they buy a lot of it. So it's just stuff like that, which really helps you automate, right? The amount of people that will have taken to analyze that data, start those processes and things like that is really cut in half, and if not more in some instances. The other one is electric utilities. So first you saw electric utilities using it for, again, they take in weather data and they're looking at what impacts occur over the last 5 years and when to basically not produce more energy, but be aware of the impacts and when do people utilize more energy. So it could be your electricity or natural gas or things like that, right? So looking at the weather patterns and things like that. But also that's going towards your homes now, where think of any Internet of Things, and you're looking at your Nest thermostat or something along those lines, you know, the next big phase of that is really saying, when can I turn certain things off based on that same type of data that's getting potentially pushed from the utility company. So if you ever wonder why some of the local utilities now integrate with your home thermostat and saying, hey, we want to sync with this so we can pull the data. Well, that's so that they can learn and create patterns based on that, right? So the other one is call centers, help desk, and service desk. So this is one for us, is where, you know, AI and machine learning, where we can start looking at one, you can look at tone of voice in a call, and you can determine if the client is upset, right? And that creates feedback. You can look at the type of tickets, and instead of having, you know, your BI dashboards, which is great, but it's also analyzing the data. So what type of tickets in real time? What are the common events? What can we do? Are there any robotic processes that we can kick off, or automated processes that can be kicked off to resolve some of those issues, right? So those are major things that are hitting infrastructure, technology companies, managed services providers like ourselves are already looking at a lot of the AI and ML and implementing them in certain areas like, you know, malware prevention. So, you know, to touch on that, and cybersecurity is the next one, is a lot of us are already implementing, you know, the basis for those. So doing threat hunting with cybersecurity. So having 5 analysts continually looking at something, or having AI and ML engines to be looking at these patterns as well, right? It's constantly learning 24/7. So that's another major area where artificial intelligence and machine learning is being utilized, is to combat threats. All of the tool sets you're going to start seeing, from, you know, antivirus to like threat hunting, to your SIM solutions, and all those are going to have AI or ML attached to them in some form or fashion. And the next phase of that is centralizing that data, right? Because you don't want a whole bunch of disparate systems, you know, and AI and ML engines really looking at them independently. You want all of that being correlated. So that's another major one. And just one real forward-thinking item with artificial intelligence and machine learning that I was talking about with Bill that really impressed me was farmers and you know, agricultural, you know, where they're growing crops and things like that. And I was telling Bill, you know, this is newer technology. Of course, that's moving. You know, it'll move down to smaller companies, but you know, they started with facial recognition and learning, you know, patterns there, but now they're starting to look at it where they're scanning, you know, crops, and they take pictures of different types of, you know, weeds, and now they scan a crop and they identify a weed, and then they spray in that one area. So, and then they look at the patterns of the weather and things like that. So if you can see the use cases that are coming about now and how they can impact, you know, just local business, you know, small, medium, and even large businesses that can take advantage of it, it's pretty significant. And to Bill's comments earlier about, you know, a cloud is a necessity. You could be left behind. Well, it could really help you generate more revenue and build more efficiencies. But if it'll be very difficult for you to keep up with the competitors out there if you're not even looking at those type of technologies that are out there. So
that's great, James. I love the for when a hurricane comes here to Houston, we need to have water, gasoline, and Pop-Tarts. I love that.
Yeah.
I think we have a question for you. There's a few bullet points up. How can I make sure there is compatibility between on-prem and cloud? How can I make sure there is compatibility between on-prem and cloud? Thank you, James.
Yeah, so, you know, honestly, there's a cloud assessment that really needs to be done. And I know we'll touch on this, I think, in one of our last slides, but as part of that cloud strategy, you really have to document what is in your environment. You have to we have to figure out what workloads can be moved. You know, all data can be ported over from on-prem to cloud, but should it be is really the question. And that gets determined, right? Should you be moving things to the cloud or not? And a cloud assessment is really the best way to do it. And it's really just getting a good understanding of the data, what you're trying to move, why you're trying to move it, and what type of data you're moving. and how secure it needs to be. And that falls back all into the cloud strategy, data strategy, and security strategy. That's really where our assessments focus on, defining and building out those areas. All right. If there are no other questions, I think we're going to move to the next slide, which is Bill's case study, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. Thank you, James.
Yeah.
And so I had alluded to Netflix earlier. After years of running its own in-house platform, Netflix eventually moved all of its workloads to the cloud. And why? Scalability. If we go to the next slide. And I love this slide. James, thank you for chasing this data down. Netflix usage spikes at certain times of day, and it briefly accounts for nearly a third of all data transferred through the internet in North America. However, at a certain time of day, Netflix's usage drops. And because of the predictable nature of Netflix's server usage, they've saved tons of money by moving to the cloud, and they can scale up and they can scale down on demand to meet the rhythm of the worldwide video streaming. So James, I'm going to pass it back to you for the next case study.
All right. Jordan, if you could move it. Thank you very much. So, one of the case studies is a client of ours, and kind of what I'd like to touch on is the question that was just asked about, how do you figure out what you need? And one of the great examples, like Bill gave with Netflix, is also with a client of ours named Pathfinder, and they were in a position to, I would say, pivot or transition from an IT perspective. They were looking to do something more than what they were doing. So when they started to look at the environment and really engaged us, we put together several strategies, and this goes into kind of that overall cloud assessment. What do you have today? What do you want in the future? And what's achievable with the current systems that you have, right? And then we started to look at the different platforms, and we started to look at, okay, on-premise, what do you have? Okay, let's look at your PCs. Let's look at the devices that connect in. Let's look at the on-premise services and applications that you're running. And then we started to say, okay, well, what type of integrations are really there? So we don't really need content delivery networks, and we do need the virtual networks, and we do need to connect it to a cloud or a private cloud to improve resiliency and redundancy, even though they had a very robust on-premise and data center infrastructure. It was more so, what can we do by utilizing the cloud and getting out of the IT business? And their main focus was getting out of the IT business. They're not an IT company, and they didn't want to be. So that's really their main focus of utilizing the cloud. And then what type of application layer do they want? So did they need something that was platform as a service? Did they need something that was infrastructure as a service? And what we ended up settling on is kind of a combination of things, is really an Azure-based infrastructure as a service offering to move all those critical applications into Azure. And that way they're improving the resiliency and redundancy that's available to them, and the DR capabilities as well. As part of that, we minimize the overall infrastructure as well. So when you don't have to worry about the hardware to run the virtual, the virtual systems and the additional networking that's required, we shut down an entire data center, eliminated hardware on-premise, and moved that entire infrastructure into Azure. So now they have the ability to run completely out of Azure. They're not impacted by a data center. They're not impacted by their local office being down. All that stuff is run out of Azure with the built-in resiliency and redundancy that's they require. Also, to that perspective, they can toggle up the performance if need be or not, or they could reduce systems as needed. If not, storage-wise, they're not worrying about refreshes anymore. None of those things are a concern of theirs anymore, of hardware purchases for new servers and licensing, and all that stuff was taken care of when we moved to the Azure platform. The other major piece of it too was moving away from an on-premise phone system. So kind of what we talked about earlier too about, a UCaaS or a hosted phone system or cloud-based phone system. As part of this, we also looked at a couple of the phone systems and moved them to a cloud-based phone system, even lessening the dependency on the local office that they had. So now, all services out of the data center and out of their core office were moved into the cloud, either Azure or a hosted phone system, and really give them the ability to work from anywhere if need be. So, and then improving the overall resiliency and redundancy for the environment or for the company. So, what started that? And actually, let's hit the next slide if you're good, because I think that's a good transition. What really started that was the assessment, understanding what they have, understanding what they needed to do, where they wanted to go, what type of cost did they want to get rid of, how they wanted to get out of the IT business. And Bill, I'll let you hit on some of these as well, but really, I think it really starts with an assessment of what you have today to create that cloud strategy, data strategy, and security strategy. So.
Yeah, and just tagging along, I think we're coming up on the hour, so I want to leave at least a minute or two for questions. But just James, you had mentioned like shadow IT before, and we've seen companies with different lines of business spinning up virtual machines on their own in the cloud. And an assessment will help bring all those together, because if different lines of business are spinning up machines, they may not be buying it in the most efficient manner. When combining all those agreements and things like that, we can help through that, deploying it the best way possible. So why don't we do this? We've got 2 minutes left. If we can open it up for questions.
We just welcome anybody to chat any questions. There's a little chat tool right there in your WebEx. You can send it over. You can raise your hand. You can use the Q&A, whatever your preference is. We open it up to questions at this point. Okay, well, we didn't have any questions come in. I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you, James and Bill. You did a fantastic job. That was really great information. And we will be sending everyone the full presentation deck will be emailed to you, along with a link to this full recording that we'll have on YouTube for you to be able to access. So thank you all for joining, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.